So the Rebbe is going to talk about the pasuk in the Haftorah. It says, "ושמתי כדכד שמשותיך." I will make your window panes. I will make them from k'dkod, a certain type of material that we don't know yet what exactly that material is. V'sharayich la'avne egdoch, and your gates, it seems to be like the pillars of the gates, the place where the gates get its shape from. That will be made from other types of very bright and beautiful stones. And your entire boundary, meaning throughout the entire country, will be filled with the whole, this cobblestones, etc., will be inlaid with desirous stones, meaning the very precious stones that everybody wants. And then it concludes, and all your sons, all your children are students of Hashem, and there will be much peace of your children. In other words, your children will have a lot of peace. It says in the Haftorah of this Shabbos Kodesh day. It's brought down to what they said in the Gemara, ושמתי כדכד שמשותיך, that the Gemara discusses about this word כדכד, שפירושו ha'aras hashemesh. What does, first of all, שמשותיך mean? Why are windows called shimshesayich? Because shimshesayich is a derivative of the word sun, and shimshesayich means how the ray of the sun travels. Chaloinos shechama zarachas b'hem, windows that the sun shines in and through them. So getting back to k'dkod, what is k'dkod exactly? Pligid, the Gemara brings our machlokes of either trei malachim b'mesifta derekia Gabriel and Michael, that there is a dispute actually between two malachim in the yeshiva of heaven, which was Gabriel and Michael are arguing about this. The Amri law and others say it wasn't a machlokes in heaven, but trei amaroi b'marava, two amaroim in the west. In Gemara, when it speaks about the west, it refers to Eretz Yisrael because Bavel, Iraq, is east of Eretz Yisrael. So they always refer to the people of Eretz Yisrael, the Tanoim, Amroim of Eretz Yisrael, they call them Marava, the west. So instead of it being a dispute between the two Malachim, it was rather a dispute between two Amoraim in the west and Eretz Yisrael. Hainu b'mesifta da'ara, in other words, in the yeshiva of the earth, not in the yeshiva of heaven. And the dispute was as follows: Chad Amar Shoyham. One of the disputants said that it was a stone known as Shoyham. Chad Amar Yoshvei. Another one says it was Yoshvei. As we soon see, these are two stones that are enumerated concerning the garb of the Kohen Gadol. Amr Lahu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem told those two disputants, Leve kedain ukedain, let it be like those and those, these and those. Kedivri zev, kedivri zev, let it be like the words of these and the words of those. V'hainu k'dkod, that's the meaning k'dkod. It's like kedain v'kedain. So both should be both Shoyham and Yoshvei. The Rebbe goes on to say, since the pasuk doesn't leave its simple meaning, it's also understood concerning the pasuk that I will make your windows out of k'dkod, that he's speaking about the promises and that which have been foretold in Mashiach's times. This goes in regards to what Yeshayahu Hanavi said, what's going to be our illumination, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes with our lighting systems, if you will. So Yeshayahu says, ordinary light, that's not for the Yidden anymore. That the sunlight will not be anymore, or the sun will not be anymore your daylight. And so, like in continuation of that, he says, rather, Amar Oid, he says, additionally, ושמתי כדכד, that I will make it your windows out of this kidchod material. It's a precious stone that is going to shine for you instead of your windows, instead of the sun coming through the windows. It's like you won't need any more the light of the sun. This explanation is what the Dvar Malchus says over there in the Gemara that speaks about this dispute. So this means the Rebbe goes on, in addition to all matters about us, the way they are spiritually, the spiritual idea that the sun will not be our sunlight, Hashem will be our sunlight, etc., etc., all the spiritual ideas, this will also be a physical event in the physical world. And the Rebbe brings a proof of this from a different part in the Gemara. Later on, this is seen especially, this is a physical thing, from what's brought down and written in the continuation of the Gemara, Liglig Olav Oisai Talmud. So there was a certain student that made fun of this type of idea to discuss whether it's Shoyam and Yashve, that you're going to say such a thing. And Rabbi Yochanan said that Hashem is going to bring precious stones and so on that are 30 by 30 amas, and he's going to make an opening of 20 amas in that 30 by 30 amas, and that's going to be the gates of Yerushalayim. So the student that heard it said, it's ridiculous. You can't find even a stone that's a precious stone that's like the size of an egg, of a dove's egg, a pigeon's egg. So how are you going to find such great large stones? And Chaza, and then this student eventually took a trip by sea, and he saw Malachi Asharis the Yosvi Kaminsiri Avonim Tovis Margolis. He saw heavenly angels that were sitting, and they were chiseling out precious stones that were this height and this size, to be able to prepare it for the time when Mashiach comes, to be able to make these beautiful gates for Yerushalayim. So from that whole description of the give and take between Rabbi Yochanan and the student and so on, Shemezem, move on top of the next Mucha, from top of the next page. From this, it's obvious that these matters will be also in the physical sense. Actually, the student actually asked the Malachim, what are these for? And the Malachim said, this is what Hashem is going to be placing in the gates and the entranceway to Yerushalayim. The Imloi Kain, if this is not talking about a physical event, if it's talking about a spiritual event, why was it necessary to show the student the physical things? Obviously, by showing the physical things, he meant to indicate that this is a reality in the physical world. We need to understand, in the future time, the world will be in a higher way, even higher than it was at the beginning of creation. This means, in addition to the fact that the world was created complete and full, in other words, that the world was created perfect. Nothing was lacking. Nothing was missing. Like it says, these are the histories of the world. Toldos Moli. It says the word Toldos with Vav inside. Throughout the Torah, there's it says Toldos with Vavs inside. It could be written without a Vav. And Toldos Peretz says with Vavs inside. Otherwise, it'll a lot of times not say it, if not all the times. So what does that mean? Toldos Moli means to tell you that the world was created fully and complete. Nothing was lacking. Despite that, concerning the future time, it says Toldos Peretz, that these are the offsprings of Peretz, Yehuda's twins from Tamar, which were Peretz and Zarach, and Peretz was eventually, would start from him, the Davidic dynasty. Dvar Malchus would come from Peretz, which would lead to Mashiach, and Mashiach is called Yalla HaPoretz L'Farneinu, the one who breaks forth, Toldos Moli. So Peretz is also said with the word Toldos, full, indicating that Mashiach's times is also the world going to be a perfection, but not the same perfection like the beginning of creation, but rather in a much higher way than these are the births and the histories of the heavens and the earth at the beginning of creation. To such a degree will the world reach such a greater stage than it was initially, that for the wonderful state that the world will reach when Mashiach comes, it would have made worthwhile all the not wanted things, not good things that occurred leading up to Mashiach's times. Why? In a way of descent for the sake of an ascent. If the world was just going to be returning to perfection as it was at the beginning of creation, so then there was no gain from the entire descent. Obviously, the perfection and the completion that will happen to the world when Mashiach comes must be of a much greater level. If so, the Rebbe goes on in line 13, why is it insufficient? The idea that your windows are chadchod, and also your gates will be from this egdoch type of stone, and the entire boundary are these desirous stones. Why is it not sufficient the way it's in the spiritual? And we brought before a proof that it's going to be also in the physical. Why is there a need that it should be physically as well? Because it's already going to be a perfect world, way beyond what we had when we were way beyond what we had at the beginning of creation. Another question that I've asked in line 17, also we need to understand what's the idea of the three levels? One level is shoyham, another level is yashvei, and another level is that it should be like both shoyam and yashvei. Move on. So the Rebbe says from the fact that the beginning of the pasuk begins with already three levels. From this is understood, Gam ben Egel in Yonim Shalach is also concerning the matters that will follow after Shoyam and Yashvei. Shorayich la'avne egdoch, v'chol gvulich la'avne chefet, v'chol menayich l'mudei Hashem v'rav le'benoyer. All of these things that it says in the pasuk further, as well, just like the beginning of the pasuk has three levels, Shoyam, Yashvei, and both together. The same thing, each of the next things, Shorayich and Gvuleich and Benayich, all of those also have three things. Each one of these things include three levels, as we will explain further. This will be understood according to what's explained in the Mamorim, the difference between Shoyam and Yashvei. These are amongst the stones that were on the Choshen, that the Kohen Gadol wore, the breastplate, that upon them was engraved the names of the Shvatim. On the Shoyam was engraved the name of Yosef Tzaddik. And on Yashvei it was engraved the name Binyamin. Moving for this understood. The difference between Shoyam and Yashvei is the difference between the level of Yosef and the level of Binyamin. What's the idea behind it? What's their different levels? The Hine, top of page Zayin, you do what's known. Yosef Binyamin, Shahayu Achim Emachas. Yosef and Binyamin that were brothers from the same mother. They're both called by the name Tzaddik. Yosef with Tzaddik Elyon. Yosef is the upper level of Tzaddik. The idea behind it is drawing down from above to below. That's why it's called Tzaddik Elyon. The Binyamin who Tzaddik Tachten, and Binyamin is the lower Tzaddik. Its level is about elevating from below to above. So first, he has to explain what the concept of tzaddik is. The Rebbe doesn't bring this pasuk here, but in other Amorim he speaks about the idea that there's the level of tzaddik yisoid olam. Tzaddik yisoid olam means that the level of yisoid is identical with the level of tzaddik. The sphere of yisoid is what connects the mashpia and the makabel. Yisoid is the last of the 9 spheres preceding Malchus, the last of the 6 midas preceding Malchus. That's all the spheres above it is mashpia. Malchus is makabel. Yisoid, which is also called tzaddik, is the joining between the mashpia and the makabel. Now, in the joining of the mashpia and the makabel, there's the yisoid of the mashpia and there's the yisoid of the makabel. That's what he's talking about now. There's the tzaddik elyon. That's what we're going to talk about. That's how the mashpia and the connection of the mashpia coming down to below, or the halah of the makabel, the joining of the makabel to the mashpia. It says in line 5, "V'hainu she'tzadik moed al laskatras hamashpia v'makabel." The word tzaddik indicates the bond between the mashpia and the makabel, like we mentioned before, because tzaddik yisoid olam. Not just any type of bond, but like Yaakov Avinu said concerning Binyamin, when the Shvatim wanted to get Yaakov to allow Binyamin to come down to Mitzrayim, they were saying that this is very dangerous. When later on, when they had to speak to how important it is that Binyamin returns to Yaakov after he was taken by Yosef, that Yaakov Avinu's soul is bound up completely with Binyamin. So we see the idea of bond of the level of tzaddik. So he says, because of this iskashrus of the mashpia and the makabel, shalachein mashpia laman the less le megamei klum. Therefore, the mashpia, because he connects and he bonds himself with the receiver, he gives to one that has nothing of their own, just like it says about Malchus, that Malchus is one, the less le megamei klum, it has nothing of its own. Now, the word tzaddik is related to tzedakah, which is connected to this idea of being mashpia. Like it says, tzaddik havaya, because havaya is a tzaddik, tzedakah is ahiv. He loves doing tzedakah. So there we see about this kashrus and the bond and the giving over of mashpia to makabel that he transmits and gives over to one who has nothing of their own. But that's but there's 2 levels, tzaddik el and tzaddik tacht. So he says in line 9, Amnam in Yonishal Yosef who loy tzaddik stam al tzaddik el. The idea of Yosef is not an ordinary tzaddik, but a higher tzaddik. Hainu, this means shay skatrus to mashpia makabel shay de Yosef, the bond of mashpia makabel that comes about through Yosef. Iba oifen sham shacham amayla mata. It's in such a manner that it's drawing down from above to below. Ordinarily, we think Yisoid is the lowest of the spheres before it hits Malchus. But no, even though it's a level of Yisoid, but it taps in and draws down from the most highest level. Where do we see this? Because Yosef, who's a tzaddik elyon, was known to be even higher than Avishar. Yosef was even higher than the forefathers. Shehum Yisoid the Adam Kadman. We know that Yosef, even though he's identified with Yisoid, he's not just the Yisoid of Atzilus, he's from the level of Yisoid of Ak, of Adam Kadman, that preceded the whole Seder Ishtalshus practically, the first level in the Kav after the Tzimtzum Harishon. Kimavur b'Teres Chaim b'Soifa, let's explain at the end of Teres Chaim of the Mittler Rebbe. Misham, from that high level, Yisoid of Ak, Mamshech ad lamata mata, he draws down to the lowest most levels. According to this will be understood the reason that many Mamorim it's brought down concerning what Yosef does, because he's a tzaddik, because he's the level of Yisoid. It's explaining about how Yosef is about bringing things down. So it brings Hapasik v'Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. It brings the pasuk as an indication of this lowering, that Yosef lowers himself, brings the pasuk that Yosef was lowered to Mitzrayim. Seemingly, the Mamorim could have brought a raya from other psukim that shows the idea of Yosef descending, etc., etc. but based on what was mentioned earlier, that Yosef, first of all, comes from the highest most level, brings down from the highest most level, and that goes lamata mata, and because the highest always can go reach to the lowest. So based on that, it's understood why this particular pasuk was brought for Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. That the intention in bringing this pasuk is to emphasize the idea of Yosef is to draw down from the most highest level until the most lowest level. That's the idea that Yosef was lowered to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the most immoral place in the entire world. It's the lowest, most level. So instead of other words that speak about Yosef's descent, let's say into the pit or whatever, he uses the most lowest form of descent going into Mitzrayim, because that indicates even more so this type of reach, that Yosef reached the lowest, most levels. Amram Binyamin Tzadik Tachten, but Binyamin is called the Tzadik of below. V'hainu shagam Binyamin Tzadik. Also Binyamin is a Tzadik. Shemoir al iskashus hamashpia v'makabel, that indicates the bond between the mashpia and the makabel. Kanisker le'ela was mentioned previously. El Binyamin Tzadik Tachten, but Binyamin is the lower Tzadik. Hainu sheiskashus hamashpia v'makabel hi ba'oifen shel ha'ala milmata l'mayla. The bond of the mashpia and the makabel by Binyamin, it's a bond in a way of ascending from below to above. Top of page ches. This is also the difference between the shoyham and yashve stone. Like we mentioned before, on the shoyham stone, Yosef was engraved. Yosef's name was engraved. In Yonam Shacham Lamata, the shoyham stone represents the drawing down from above to below. The Yashve and the Yashve stone, Binyamin, that on the Yashve stone was engraved. Binyamin, in Yone Halam Al Mata Lamayla, it's idea about ascending from below to above. So the Rebbe goes on the second paragraph on Ches, line 5. We know all matters of above come down here below through an inspiration down here below that is similar to inspiration above. In other words, we must reflect in our avodah these two types of iskashros from above to below to draw these two iskashros down. We must say that those matters that were mentioned before of drawing down and ascending, there's also in the avodah of a yid we must say as well. So he's going to point out what parts of avodas Hashem is about hamshacha, what parts is halah. The idea behind this is the Torah in Yana hamshacha mamayla mata. Torah's idea is about drawing down from above to below. Through a yid learning Torah, so he draws down anew the idea of the giving of Torah from the essence of the Ein Sof. Like it says, Elohim spoke all these matters, saying, es kol divrei ha-Torah mashekvar nemar l'moishe misinai. The famous question is, what was the lamer? What's the idea of the word lamer that says, Vaydaber Elohim es kol dvar me'elo lamer? Hashem addressed all the Yidden. So what does it say to say? So one of the explanations is that when we learn Torah now, we are causing those same words to be said again and be repeated. So every single time I learn Torah, so I'm drawing down from above the hamshacha of Torah, just like the first time by Har Sinai. So that's why Torah is hamshacha from above to below.